They were the picture of perfection. Jane and Daniel Wexler, high school sweethearts turned power couple. She, a bright and compassionate school counselor. He, a charismatic real estate mogul. Their Instagram feed overflowed with curated happiness. Sunset vacations, champagne toasts, and carefully framed smiles. But behind the filtered photos lay a house of secrets. Secrets so dark they would shatter everything. This is the story of justice for Jane. The crime that shocked an entire community and exposed how love can be the perfect mask for something sinister. Jane met Daniel during her sophomore year of college. He was magnetic, confident, ambitious, and fiercely protective. Jane was drawn in by his charm, and before long, they were inseparable. Friends called them the real deal. By 28, Daniel had built a multi-million-dollar real estate firm, and Jane had become the emotional rock of her local high school. They married in a lavish ceremony. Guests described it as a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as we know, often hide monsters. 2 years into the marriage, Jane's demeanor began to shift. She was quieter, thinner, and always tired. She brushed off concerns with a tight smile and had just busy with work. But her journal told another story. He watches everything. The smiles feel fake. I miss being able to breathe. Unknown to Jane, Daniel's business was collapsing. Years of shady deals and financial mismanagement had caught up with him. But rather than come clean, he doubled down, using Jane's savings, forging her signature, and taking out life insurance policies. Yes, multiple policies. Jane's close friend and coworker, Rachel, became increasingly suspicious. After a lunch date where Jane burst into tears over a missed text from Daniel, Rachel followed her gut and dug deeper. That's when she discovered something chilling. Daniel had a sealed arrest record from his early 20s for assaulting a former girlfriend. Jane didn't know. Rachel confronted Jane with the truth, and for the first time, Jane admitted she was afraid. She promised to leave, but she needed time. She wanted to be safe. She started planning her escape quietly. But Daniel was watching. On a rainy Thursday morning, police were called to the Wexler home. A neighbor had heard a loud crash, followed by silence. Inside, they found Jane unconscious at the bottom of the stairs, her skull fractured. Daniel claimed she slipped, cried at the hospital, held her hand, told the nurses she had low blood pressure and often got dizzy. But the doctors found defensive wounds, scratches, bruises, signs of struggle. Jane wasn't clumsy. 2 days later, she was gone. Jane Wexler, 33 years old, dead from what was initially ruled an accident. But her friend Rachel didn't buy it. Neither did the lead detective on the case. Rachel handed over Jane's journal to authorities, and it blew the case wide open. The entries painted a clear picture of fear, manipulation, and slow psychological torment. The life insurance policies Daniel had quietly opened totaled over $3.5 million. And there were documents, falsified ones, tied directly to Daniel. The biggest break came from Jane's secret phone, which Rachel had retrieved from her desk at school. In her voice memos, Jane's speaking into the dark. "If anything happens to me, it's Daniel. Please don't let him get away with it." That voice became the heartbeat of the case. Daniel was arrested 3 weeks after Jane's death. He was smug, dismissive, insisted it was all a mistake. But as the evidence mounted, his world crumbled. The trial was explosive. The prosecution painted Daniel as a man who couldn't handle failure, a narcissist who viewed Jane as an extension of his image, not as a partner. Rachel testified. Jane's students testified. Even one of Daniel's exes came forward with stories that mirrored Jane's. The final moment came when the jury heard Jane's voice memo. The courtroom went still. Guilty. Second-degree murder. 25 years to life. Justice was served, but it didn't bring Jane back. A scholarship was set up in her name, the Jane Wexler Foundation for Empowering Women. Her story became a national headline, a cautionary tale, a symbol of unseen abuse behind closed doors. Rachel spoke publicly, urging women to trust their instincts, to listen when something feels wrong. And Daniel, well, Daniel sits in a maximum security prison, watching the empire he built crumble, his name now synonymous with betrayal and greed. But just when everyone thought the story had ended, a letter arrived. Postmarked from a small town in Oregon. Addressed to Rachel. No return address. Inside was a single sentence written in Jane's handwriting. He wasn't working alone. Jane Wexler was murdered by the man she loved. Her husband, Daniel, once seen as the perfect partner, was revealed to be a controlling, manipulative killer driven by greed and ego. Thanks to the courage of her friend Rachel and the evidence Jane left behind, Daniel was sentenced to 25 years to life. But then a mysterious letter arrived. A single sentence written in Jane's handwriting. He wasn't working alone. Rachel stared at the letter for hours. The handwriting was undeniably Jane's. But how? Was it written before her death? And if so, who mailed it? The envelope was clean. No fingerprints. No DNA. Postmarked from a quiet town in Oregon Jane had no known ties to. Rachel brought the letter to Detective Markham, the lead investigator from Jane's case. He was skeptical at first, until a forensic analyst confirmed the letter was authentic and the ink dated back only 4 weeks, which meant one terrifying possibility. Someone still had access to Jane's personal belongings. Detective Markham and Rachel traveled to Oregon, following the postmark to a small rural post office. There, a breakthrough. A security camera had caught a man dropping off the letter, wearing a hood, sunglasses, and gloves. But when they enhanced the footage, Rachel froze. She recognized the man's walk. It was Marcus Cain, Daniel's former business partner, a name that never came up in court. A man who had disappeared the same month Daniel was arrested. Marcus had been the silent third party in Daniel's real estate empire. He was the money man, low profile, clean record, and always operating from the shadows. And now, he was back in the picture. A deeper investigation revealed that Marcus had wired large sums of money to a Cayman Islands account shortly before Jane's death. He had also purchased a secluded cabin in Oregon 6 months prior, under a fake name. When Rachel and Markham visited the cabin, it had already been emptied. No signs of Marcus, just a burned laptop, a woman's earring, and eerily a photo of Jane. It was clear Marcus had been watching her, perhaps even manipulating Daniel. Was he the puppet master behind it all? Meanwhile, Rachel received another shock. Jane had once filed a restraining order against an unknown stalker in college, someone who had never been caught. The name on the old police file? Mark Cain, an alias Marcus had used. The obsession hadn't started with Daniel. It started before Jane even met him. Marcus had been following her, watching her, possibly orchestrating her relationship with Daniel from the start. What if Jane was never just a victim of domestic violence? What if she was the target of a calculated, long-term plan? Back in prison, Daniel Wexler requested to speak to Rachel. He hadn't spoken since the trial. Now he looked pale, thinner, broken. What he told her changed everything. Marcus promised me everything: money, clients, power. But when things started falling apart, he told me the only way out was Jane's insurance. He said she was already marked, that he'd clean it up. I didn't know he meant murder. I thought she'd just leave. Rachel realized Daniel wasn't innocent, but he wasn't the mastermind. He was a pawn. And Marcus? A predator in the dark, always one step ahead. Marcus Cain was now the FBI's primary target. A nationwide manhunt was launched. His face was broadcast across the news, and tips began pouring in. One came from a woman in Idaho. She said a man matching Marcus's description had been renting a room under the name Martin Cain. He paid in cash, stayed off the grid, and left suddenly when the news broke. But not before saying something chilling. You can't catch a ghost. Rachel, once just Jane's best friend, had become a crusader for the truth. She started speaking at domestic violence conferences, sharing Jane's story, and building a national campaign. #Justice for Jane. The campaign inspired thousands of women to come forward about their experiences. Jane had become more than a victim. She had become a symbol. And then a break. A partial fingerprint was recovered from the photo found in the Oregon cabin. It was Marcus. The case was reopened. A new warrant was issued, and the hunt became personal. But just when it seemed justice was closing in, Rachel received another envelope. This time, there was no postmark. It had been hand-delivered, Inside was a USB drive. She plugged it in, her hands shaking. There, in grainy footage, was a video of Jane, tied to a chair, bruised, eyes terrified, days before she was reported dead. A voice off camera whispered, "Say goodbye, Jane." And then, static. Rachel screamed. The file corrupted instantly. Was Jane's timeline all a lie? Was she alive longer than anyone knew? Did someone help cover it up? What else had Marcus done? And who helped him do it? Jane Wexler's murder seemed solved when her husband, Daniel, was convicted. But a mysterious letter from Jane, mailed after her death, suggested someone else was involved. That someone was Marcus Cain, Daniel's ex-business partner, and Jane's obsessive stalker from years earlier. Just as the FBI closed in, Jane's best friend Rachel received a USB drive with disturbing footage. Jane, alive and terrified, days after her supposed time of death. Everything they thought they knew was wrong. Rachel couldn't sleep. The image of Jane bound and bruised haunted her every blink. Detective Markham brought in a cyber forensics team to recover the rest of the corrupted footage. But hours turned into days with no luck. Then came a breakthrough. Hidden in the USB's metadata was a GPS tag. The coordinates pointed to an abandoned farmhouse in upstate New York. Markham, Rachel, and a team of agents headed straight there. What they found inside chilled them. The house was frozen in time, as if someone had left in a hurry. Furniture overturned, rotting food on plates, a flickering light bulb swinging in the hallway. And in the basement, a horror show. Chains bolted to the wall, a stained mattress, scraps of paper filled with Jane's handwriting, journal entries written while she was being held. She was alive longer than anyone had thought. And worse, she knew Marcus wasn't acting alone. One torn page read, "She told him to do it. She said I was in the way." She, another player in the game. Someone close. Someone unexpected. Back at headquarters, Rachel replayed every moment from the trial. Every face in the courtroom. Every testimony. One name kept resurfacing. Elena Pierce, Daniel's defense attorney. A woman who had seemed overly invested. Too defensive. Too polished. Rachel remembered how Elena looked at her during cross-examination. Cold, calculating, almost resentful. Digging deeper, she found that Elena had once worked for Marcus Cain's firm, years before becoming Daniel's lawyer. It couldn't be a coincidence. Was Elena part of the plan from the start? Using subpoenaed bank records, Markham traced a $250,000 deposit into Elena's account just weeks before Jane's murder. Money that was never declared. And then a wiretap recording surfaced. Elena on the phone. With Marcus. She said 5 words that changed everything. She was never supposed to survive. They had tried to keep Jane alive long enough to make it look like she vanished, hoping Daniel could collect the insurance while Marcus erased the evidence. But Jane resisted, fought back, so Marcus finished the job, with Elena helping him cover it up in court. Rachel felt the walls close in. People Jane trusted had betrayed her. Daniel, Marcus, Elena, each played a role in her destruction. But now, Rachel was determined to make them pay. She held a press conference revealing everything. The journal entries, the video, the hidden bank transfers. Public outrage exploded. #JusticeForJane trended nationwide. Elena was arrested for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus, however, was still out there, watching. Late one night, Rachel returned to her apartment to find her door ajar. Her heart pounded. Inside, nothing seemed stolen, but on her kitchen table a single Polaroid. It showed her sleeping. On the back, scrawled in blood-red ink, "You're next, Rachel." The FBI moved her to a safe house, but the message was clear. Marcus wasn't finished, and he had eyes everywhere. Now it was Rachel's turn to fight back. She staged a fake press leak claiming she had recovered the full, uncorrupted footage of Jane's final days and would be releasing it live on national television. The bait was set. At the broadcast station, FBI agents hid in plain clothes, cameras ready, phones tapped, exits sealed. At exactly 11:47 p.m., a masked man slipped in through a back entrance. He never saw the agents until it was too late. But when they pulled off the mask, it wasn't Marcus. It was someone else, someone they never expected. It was Thomas Wexler, Daniel's older brother. The man who introduced Daniel to Marcus years ago. The man who comforted Jane at their engagement party. The man who vanished from the spotlight after the trial. He confessed everything. He helped Marcus plan the abduction. He knew Jane's routines, knew where to place the cameras. And when Daniel panicked, it was Thomas who cleaned the scene. Why? Because she was about to ruin us, he said coldly. She found out we were laundering money through Daniel's firm. If she talked, we'd all be dead. Rachel sat in silence as the truth unraveled. Marcus, Elena, Thomas, Daniel, all of them puppeteers in a grand, cruel performance. But one question remained. As Thomas was escorted out in handcuffs, he turned to Rachel and whispered, "You still don't know who gave her the camera?" Rachel blinked. The hidden camera Jane used to record her secret video, the one that exposed Daniel, had never been traced. Was there someone else? Another ally? Or another traitor? Suddenly, Rachel's phone buzzed. A blocked number. One message. A photo of Jane, smiling. Dated 2 days ago. Jane Wexler's supposed murder was just the beginning. A hidden video, a stalker named Marcus, and a conspiracy involving Daniel's brother Thomas and his lawyer Elena shocked everyone. But just as justice seemed within reach, Rachel received a new photo of Jane. Alive. Dated just 2 days ago. Had the woman they buried not been Jane at all? Rachel stared at the photo. It was blurry but unmistakably Jane. Same deep brown eyes. Same freckle under her left eye. Same faint scar across her chin. Jane was alive. Somehow, Detective Markham's team raced to verify the metadata, location, and timestamp. The image was traced to a surveillance camera in Bogota, Colombia, snapped at an airport cafe. Why would Jane be in South America? And how did everyone get it so wrong? Exhuming Jane's grave wasn't easy, but the judge approved it based on the new evidence. The autopsy team worked in tense silence. Hours later, the truth came out. The woman buried in Jane Wexler's grave wasn't Jane. She was a drifter. A woman reported missing 2 months before Jane's disappearance. Her identity had been deliberately obscured through dental tampering and DNA contamination. It was a switch, a fake death. Jane didn't die that night. She vanished, or was helped to disappear. But by whom? Rachel replayed the USB footage again, this time with fresh eyes. One frame caught her attention, someone entering the room where Jane was held. A woman, face hidden by shadows, voice muffled. Jane whispered, "You promised me." That woman wasn't Elena. Rachel enhanced the audio. A faint accent emerged. Eastern European? Maybe. Then she remembered something Jane once said. "If anything ever happens to me, ask Katerina." Katerina Petrov, Jane's college roommate, a quiet figure in Jane's past who worked in cyber intelligence and vanished from Rachel's life after graduation. Could Katerina have helped fake Jane's death? Interpol records showed Katerina hadn't been seen publicly in years. She was rumored to work in dark web countersurveillance. Some said she worked for a government. Others said she was the government. But one lead emerged. A private investigator in Miami had once hired her. He remembered her because of one chilling quote she'd left him with. "Sometimes, to save a life, you have to erase it first." Rachel followed a trail of encrypted emails, burner phone numbers, and black market passport requests, until it all led back to Bogota. Rachel booked a flight. She was going after her. Rachel arrived in Bogota and met with a local contact. He handed her an address scrawled on a torn napkin and said only one thing. "If she's who I think she is, be careful. She doesn't like surprises." Rachel found the apartment tucked behind a dusty market. She knocked twice. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Then the door opened. Standing there was Jane. Alive. Pale. Thinner. But very much alive. Jane broke down as Rachel embraced her. She told everything. Marcus had abducted her, but she'd struck a deal with Katerina, who had ties to intelligence contacts. They faked her death and replaced her with another body, giving Jane a chance to escape the web of betrayal closing in around her. She was never just a victim. She became part of the plan to expose the rot from within. But there was a price. She had to leave everything behind. Her home, her identity, even Rachel. Jane handed Rachel a flash drive. This is everything. All the recordings, all the bank transfers, all the names. Rachel asked the question she'd been holding in her heart. Why didn't you tell me? Jane's voice cracked. Because you were on the list. They were watching you. If they thought we were connected, they would have killed you too. Back in New York, Markham analyzed the drive. It detailed an elaborate conspiracy going back 10 years. Corporate fraud, shell companies, bribed officials. But the most damning file? A wire transfer from an offshore account. Recipient, Dr. Evelyn Gray, a highly respected trauma therapist who had been treating Jane and several others close to the case. Dr. Gray had access to all their secrets and had been selling them to the highest bidder. She wasn't just a therapist, she was the real puppet master. The one pulling strings behind Marcus, Elena, and even Thomas. Jane had uncovered it all, but she had no way to fight it until now. Rachel and Jane devised a plan. One final sting. Dr. Gray had recently relocated to Los Angeles under a new identity. Jane would go undercover, posing as a new patient with a different name, feeding just enough bait to see if Dr. Gray took it. Markham arranged for full surveillance. Rachel, from a nearby van, whispered through Jane's earpiece. But just before the session began, something unexpected happened. Jane froze. A voice from behind her said, "Nice to see you again, Jane." Or should I say, "Eliza." Jane turned. It was Dr. Gray, smiling. "Calm, cold. I always knew you weren't really dead." Rachel lost audio. Cameras cut out. The van's systems went dark, hacked. All they had left was one last frame from the surveillance feed. Dr. Gray's face and a syringe in her hand. Jane, motionless in the chair. After learning that Jane Wexler was alive and had been in hiding, Rachel and Jane uncovered the true mastermind behind the conspiracy. Dr. Evelyn Gray, a trusted therapist who had been orchestrating the entire scheme from behind the scenes. But just when they thought they had her cornered, Dr. Gray turned the tables, and Jane was left in a dangerous situation. The van was silent. Rachel's heart raced as she watched the feed flicker in and out. The last thing she saw was Jane, motionless in a chair, and Dr. Gray standing over her with a syringe. The FBI team scrambled to restore the surveillance footage, but they were too late. By the time they reached the therapy office, it was already empty. Jane was gone. The room was eerily clean, with only the faintest trace of a struggle. Dr. Gray had vanished once again, this time without a trace. Rachel stood in shock, feeling the weight of the moment. Her phone buzzed, and it was a message from Jane. "I'm safe, but not for long. I need you. I've made a terrible mistake." Rachel immediately called Markham. "Where is she? What happened?" he asked urgently. But Rachel didn't have answers. All she knew was that the web of lies had just grown thicker. Rachel and Markham spent the next few hours hunting down Dr. Gray's last known contacts. They traced her movements to a remote cabin in the mountains outside Los Angeles. When they arrived, they found no sign of Dr. Gray, but inside the cabin, there was something far more chilling. A detailed journal, filled with entries that chronicled not just Jane's life, but the lives of dozens of other patients. Dr. Gray had been playing a long game, manipulating vulnerable individuals for years, using therapy to control, exploit, and even destroy lives for financial gain. The final pages of the journal revealed a name that Rachel never expected to see: Katerina Petrov. It turned out Katerina wasn't just Jane's college roommate. She had been Dr. Gray's accomplice all along. The woman who had helped Jane fake her death and disappear was not just running from the authorities, she was running with them. Rachel pieced together the last part of the puzzle. Dr. Gray had been using Jane's faked death as a cover for something far larger, a money laundering operation that spanned continents. And Katerina? She had been the one managing the hidden accounts, siphoning funds under aliases. But there was one critical detail. Jane had never been entirely in the dark. She had known that the real mastermind behind the conspiracy was Dr. Gray all along. That's why she had gone into hiding. Jane had hoped that by exposing Dr. Gray and Katerina, she could bring everything crashing down. But now, the hunt wasn't just about justice for Jane. It was about stopping an entire criminal syndicate that had manipulated countless lives. Rachel and Markham tracked down Katerina to an abandoned warehouse in the city. They found her hiding among a pile of old furniture, clutching a suitcase filled with documents and money. Katerina's face was pale, her eyes frantic as she saw Rachel approach. "You don't understand," she gasped. "It was never supposed to go this far. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't back out." Rachel's blood ran cold. The woman who had helped Jane had now become just another victim of Dr. Gray's manipulation. But it was too late for Katerina. Before Rachel could say another word, the FBI surrounded the warehouse and arrested her, taking her away in cuffs. But Katerina's final words haunted Rachel. "You have no idea what she's really capable of. Dr. Gray won't stop." Weeks passed. Dr. Gray had disappeared without a trace. She was no longer on the run. She had become a ghost. But there was one last piece of the puzzle left to uncover. Rachel and Markham finally caught wind of an encrypted message sent from Dr. Gray's secure server to an unknown recipient. The message was short. "She's not the only one. There are others. We have to eliminate the threat." It was clear now. Dr. Gray hadn't been acting alone. There was a larger network, and Jane had just become a casualty of it. But just as Rachel began to process this horrifying truth, she received an unexpected visitor. A knock on the door. It was Jane. She was alive. She was free, and she was angry. "I thought I could hide, Rachel. I thought I could disappear for good. But Dr. Gray, she's always been 2 steps ahead. She was waiting for me to slip up." Jane had spent the last few weeks in hiding, trying to outsmart the woman who had controlled her life for so long. But Dr. Gray had finally figured out where Jane was. She wasn't safe. No one was. In a final, shocking twist, Rachel and Jane found themselves face to face with Dr. Gray, who had lured them into a trap. But it wasn't just Dr. Gray this time. "You're all dead," Dr. Gray said, her voice icy. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." Rachel and Jane fought back, knowing that this battle would be their last. The FBI, led by Markham, burst in just in time to stop Dr. Gray's escape. As Dr. Gray was arrested for her long list of crimes, Rachel and Jane finally realized that justice had been served. But there was no real closure, no happy ending. Dr. Gray had wreaked too much havoc in their lives, and the scars would remain forever. Dr. Gray was convicted of multiple counts of conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping, and murder. Katerina Petrov and others involved in the syndicate were arrested and brought to trial. Jane, though free, decided to leave the public eye, starting a new life under a different identity. She knew she could never undo the damage Dr. Gray had caused, but she was determined to build something positive from the ashes. Rachel, once Jane's best friend, became a tireless advocate for victims of manipulation, fraud, and abuse. Her work wasn't over. There were still countless others to help. As for Dr. Gray, her sentence was a reminder that even the most cunning criminals could be brought to justice.